April 13th, 2012, Linden, Tennessee. On what seemed like an ordinary spring morning, 20-year-old nursing student Clara Whitmore stepped away from her textbooks and walked toward the back door, where a man in camouflage was waiting. Minutes later, she vanished. When police arrived, all they found was a trail of blood near the garage and her cell phone, shattered and damp with morning dew. The disappearance shook this small Tennessee town to its core. Neighbors joined the search. Volunteers combed the woods. Her mother kept setting a dinner plate for Clara every night, refusing to believe she was gone. But weeks turned into months, and for 3 long years there were no answers, until hikers stumbled upon a sealed plastic container deep in the Natchez Trace woods. Inside were human remains. What really happened that morning in Linden? Who took Clara Whitmore, and why did it take years for the truth to surface? Tell us, where are you watching from tonight? Type your city and state in the comments below. And before we uncover the rest of this mystery, make sure to subscribe, tap the bell, and stay with us. Because in stories like this, the truth may be closer than anyone ever imagined. Friday, April 13th, 2012, dawned quietly over Linden, Tennessee, a town where nothing truly remarkable ever seemed to happen. The morning sun crept over the misty ridges, gilding the old wooden fences and waking a world that believed it still had time. In the Whitmore home, nestled near the slow-moving waters of Buffalo Creek, life unfolded with a deceptive normalcy. Clara Whitmore, just 20 years old, sat at her desk beneath a faded poster of Nashville's city skyline, tapping a highlighter on her textbook. Finals week loomed, and her nerves prickled, but she was determined to push through. Nursing school wasn't easy, especially with the weight of her dreams pressing on her shoulders. The hope of helping others, of escaping the sleepy boundaries of Linden, drove her forward. Down the hallway, the smell of fresh bread drifted from the kitchen, where her mother, Elaine, moved quietly, hands dusted with flour, humming a hymn Clara recognized from her childhood. Each morning, that song seemed to weave a cocoon of safety around their house, as if nothing bad could ever happen within its walls. In the yard, her father, Frank, tinkered under the hood of their battered old pickup, his voice muffled as he muttered about spark plugs and gaskets. For just a moment, everything felt suspended in a kind of peaceful certainty. Clara dialed her brother's number, waiting as the phone rang on the other end. Jared, her older brother by 3 years, had an interview today, the first real step toward something that might finally get him out of town, too. She offered him a pep talk, laughter bubbling through the line, both of them ignoring the silent fears that lived beneath every goodbye. Outside, robins trilled from the branches. A neighbor's dog barked at a squirrel. The kitchen clock ticked, and time, unnoticed, marched forward. At 7:49 a.m., Clara sat at the kitchen table, silver necklace glittering in the morning light, notebook open to a page scrawled with medical terms. She didn't know she was being watched. Beyond the window, the world blurred into the green hush of spring. Fields trembled under dew, and distant engines groaned along the county road. The Whitmore family's routines overlapped, forming a comforting tapestry of chores and dreams. It was, by all appearances, a day like any other. But fate rarely announces itself. At exactly 8:00 a.m., a crow screamed from a nearby tree, sharp enough to make Elaine pause mid-song. In that same moment, the town's stillness fractured. No one in the Whitmore home could know how quickly that calm would turn to chaos, how, within minutes, life would twist irreversibly, leaving questions that would echo for years. A sudden knock at the back door jolted Clara from her studies. She glanced up, expecting perhaps a neighbor or the mailman. Instead, she saw a shadowy figure, dressed in camouflage, moving toward the rear of the house, just at the edge of her sightline. She hesitated, a shiver of uncertainty racing down her spine, but she recognized that silhouette, or thought she did. The woods behind the house were familiar ground, and she was used to hunters passing through, often friends of the family or her boyfriend, Drew, who wore the same forest-patterned gear. No one else seemed to notice. Frank cursed softly as he skinned his knuckles on the pickup's engine. Elaine checked her timer and bent back over the dough. Jared, already dressed and anxious, stared at himself in the mirror, straightening his tie with shaking hands. Time compressed into a handful of seconds, a door closing, footsteps crunching on gravel, a voice calling out in greeting, too soft to carry indoors. In these quiet, unseen moments, destinies were altered, as if the entire world held its breath. Somewhere in town, the postman began his route. The school bus rumbled down Main Street, collecting children with backpacks too big for their small frames. The church bells prepared to chime the hour. No one, least of all Clara, could sense the darkness lurking just beyond the boundaries of routine. At 8:05 a.m., Elaine glanced toward the kitchen window, feeling a peculiar unease that prickled her skin. She brushed it off, kneading the dough with renewed force, refusing to acknowledge the strange tension building in the air. For a brief, fragile moment, everything remained exactly as it had always been. Then the nightmare began. It would start with absence, subtle and almost dismissible at first. A missing voice, a moment's delay, a cup of coffee cooling untouched on the table, the kind of vanishing that could be explained a dozen ways, none of them right. It would be hours before anyone would realize the significance, before the search would begin in earnest, before the name Clara Whitmore would become a prayer on every tongue in Linden. But for now, in those precious final minutes before tragedy, life in the Whitmore home glowed with the false promise that nothing bad could ever happen here. That was how the nightmare crept in, quietly, and all at once. What really happened that morning? Before that April morning, Clara Whitmore was the kind of girl whose presence lit up a room, though she rarely realized it. Her laughter was gentle, never sharp, and she had a way of listening that made people feel safe. In Linden, a town too small for secrets, everyone knew Clara, her kindness, her shy wave from the porch, the quick smile she offered, even on tired days. She moved through her world quietly, but left deep impressions everywhere she went. Clara's hair was long and blonde, soft as a child's memory. It framed a face more used to hope than fear, eyes a clear blue that held the sky's honesty. She was not the sort who sought attention. If anything, she was always a little surprised to find herself the focus. Her father's silver heart-shaped necklace, given on her 16th birthday, hung around her neck every single day, a small talisman she touched for comfort, before exams or whenever her nerves got the best of her. The Whitmore home stood near Buffalo Creek, its paint faded and porch steps creaking with every visitor. The backyard ran down to the edge of the woods, a wild tangle of maples and oaks that Clara and her brother Jared had explored since childhood. She and Jared were close, despite their differences. He was all restless energy and stubbornness. She was gentle persistence and quiet resolve. Their mother, Elaine, ruled the kitchen with steady hands, keeping traditions alive. Friday bread, Sunday dinners, the scent of cinnamon and coffee always in the air. Frank, their father, could fix anything with a wrench and a little patience, his silent devotion anchoring the family even when words failed. On her best days, Clara dreamed out loud about life beyond Linden. She wanted to be a nurse in Nashville, to walk the bright hospital corridors and make a difference in lives she'd never known. Her textbooks, worn, highlighted, dog-eared, were stacked in careful piles beside her bed. She spent hours hunched over anatomy diagrams, muttering medical terms, determined to make her father proud. She told no one, but she kept a list in her journal: hospitals to apply to, neighborhoods to explore, favorite songs to play on long drives north. The world felt open to her, full of promise. In the community, Clara was a familiar, comforting presence. She babysat for neighbors, volunteered at church events, even sang in the choir on the days she wasn't overwhelmed by schoolwork. On Friday evenings, she walked the short distance to Miss Lila's bakery to help serve pie and coffee to the regulars. The town, stubbornly old-fashioned, slow to change, had come to rely on her gentle competence. She was the sort of person people trusted with their worries and secrets, certain she would never betray them. There were rumors, as always in a place as small as Linden. Some said Clara had a secret boyfriend, a hunter named Drew who lived on the far edge of town. Others whispered that she was destined for something greater, that she'd outgrow Linden and never look back. But Clara's ambitions were quiet, not boastful. She was content to move at her own pace, to savor the routines that held her world together. She cherished her friendships, walking barefoot by the creek with Anna, studying late into the night with Sophie, writing letters to cousins she hadn't seen in years. It was the little things that defined Clara. The way she sang softly when she thought no one was listening, the careful notes she left for her mother on the refrigerator, her quiet tears after difficult exams. She was not untouched by sorrow. Her best friend had moved away. Her grandmother had passed just 2 winters earlier, but she carried her pain privately, never letting it define her. If anything, those losses made her more determined to hold her loved ones close, to never leave words unspoken. The Whitmore house, too, reflected this gentle resilience. Family photos lined the hallway, all laughter and summer sunlight. Her father's muddy boots by the back door, her mother's wildflowers on the windowsill, the old quilt Clara wrapped herself in on stormy nights. It all spoke of a life grounded in love and habit. On weekends, the family gathered for late breakfasts, Clara always the first to rise and set the table. She relished the comfort of routine, even as she dreamed of breaking free. In the eyes of the townspeople, Clara was a symbol of hope. Proof that even in a place where time seemed to stand still, someone could reach for something bigger. She belonged to Linden, and yet everyone sensed she would leave someday, taking with her the promise of youth and possibility. No one, not even Clara herself, imagined how quickly everything could change. The certainty of her future, the constancy of her presence, seemed as enduring as the creek that ran beside her home. But the world is rarely so kind. In the days after her disappearance, those who loved her would replay memories over and over. The last wave from the porch, the half-finished text message, the plans for Saturday that would never come. They would remember the way Clara smiled, the hope she carried, and wonder how a life so full of light could be swallowed up by darkness. And as posters with her face appeared on storefronts and church doors, Linden would realize that Clara Whitmore was never just another girl. She was the heart of a family, the soul of a town, and the shadow of her absence would haunt them far longer than anyone could have guessed. April 13, 2012 began like any other day in Linden, but by 7:50 a.m., The stillness that had settled over the Whitmore house was quietly unraveling. Jared, still in his interview clothes and nervous energy, moved to the kitchen window with a mug of coffee, hoping the caffeine would settle his shaking hands. The world outside seemed wrapped in the calm of early spring, the grass slick with dew, the trees swaying gently, robins hopping through patches of light. But then, just beyond the back porch, he spotted Clara. She stood by the edge of the woods, her figure slightly hunched, as if deep in conversation. Across from her was a man dressed head to toe in camouflage, his features obscured by the shadows of the tall oaks. For a fleeting moment, Jared thought nothing of it. Drew, Clara's boyfriend, was known for his love of hunting, and it wasn't unusual for him to stop by, even this early. Jared felt a faint, brotherly amusement. Clara always had a soft spot for the guys who spent more time in the woods than in town. The moment flickered and faded. Jared's mind drifted to his interview, to worries about making a good impression, to whether he'd remembered his resume. He didn't see Clara wave or say goodbye. The details blurred, lost among the thousand distractions of ordinary life. Minutes later, as he slipped his shoes on and prepared to leave, his phone vibrated. Drew's name flashed on the screen. Jared answered, ready to tease him about the early visit. But Drew's voice came through, calm and unaware. He was already 20 miles away, heading to a fishing spot with his cousins, had been on the road for half an hour. Jared's smile froze. He glanced back at the window, toward the spot where Clara had been. A sick, crawling feeling rose in his chest. Without a word, he dashed outside, the screen door banging behind him. The morning air hit him like a slap. His heart hammered as he hurried around the house, calling Clara's name into the silent woods. Nothing answered but birdsong and the distant hum of a neighbor's tractor. Behind the garage, the grass was trampled, the dew disturbed. Jared's gaze fell to a single dark stain on the cracked concrete. A tiny trail of blood, shockingly red against the gray. It curved toward the trees, disappearing beneath the tangled undergrowth. There was no scream, no shattered window, no overturned chair. Just silence, thick and impenetrable, settling over the yard like a burial shroud. He shouted for his parents, voice cracking with fear. Elaine dropped her mixing bowl and came running, her face blanching as she saw the look in Jared's eyes. Frank abandoned the pickup, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that shook between his fingers. In a few frantic minutes, they scoured the property, their voices rising and falling, calling, pleading, searching for any sign of Clara. But there was nothing. No shoe, no discarded notebook, not even a broken necklace clasp. Just the faint, bloody trail and the gnawing sense that something terrible had happened in the span of a single breath. The minutes stretched endlessly, twisting into dread. Elaine called 911, her voice quivering as she tried to explain what had happened, but she barely understood it herself. The operator promised help was on the way. Jared ran back and forth along the edge of the woods, his shoes slipping in the wet grass, his mind racing through worst-case scenarios. The first police cruiser arrived within 20 minutes. Officers moved through the property with careful urgency, marking the bloodstains, snapping photos, speaking in low, serious voices. The Whitmore family huddled on the porch, clinging to each other, every second thick with the fear of the unknown. News traveled fast in Linden, and soon neighbors appeared at the fence line, their faces etched with worry and disbelief. As the morning dragged on, more officers arrived. A search dog bayed at the edge of the woods, straining at its leash. A helicopter circled above, the beat of its blades rattling windows and turning every head toward the sky. The local fire department, friends from church, and strangers who had only ever nodded hello in passing showed up with flashlights and walking sticks. The entire community seemed to hold its breath. But as hour bled into hour, hope began to curdle into panic. No sign of Clara, no familiar voice calling back. Just the empty spaces where she should have been. For years to come, Jared would replay those moments, trying to make sense of what he had seen. The man in camouflage. The easy way Clara stood, trusting and unafraid. The way the world had seemed, for one cruel instant, completely ordinary. And in that silence, something else was born. A question that would never leave the Whitmore family, that would echo in their dreams and in every empty room. How could someone simply vanish, leaving behind nothing but a whisper and a stain? The quiet of that morning became a wound, deep and raw, scarring the heart of Lyndon. And from that moment on, everything changed. The shock of Clara's disappearance hit Lyndon with the sudden force of a summer storm. By late morning, police cars had turned the quiet Whitmore home into the center of a frantic operation. Crime scene tape fluttered in the wind, drawing the attention of every neighbor for blocks. Uniformed officers canvassed the property, their radios crackling with updates, while detectives scribbled notes and pieced together a timeline that already felt impossibly thin. Elaine stood on the porch, numb and silent, her hands shaking as she watched the officers move across her lawn. She kept expecting to see Clara emerge from the woods with an apology, muddy shoes, and a sheepish grin. But each passing minute drained that hope away. Frank paced the length of the driveway, his jaw clenched so tight it hurt, his eyes scanning the road as if somehow his daughter might just walk home, safe and whole. Word spread with the speed only a small town could manage. Soon, the county sheriff and 2 deputies arrived, their faces grim with determination. By noon, the first search party formed, local men in ball caps, women in rain jackets, and teenagers with borrowed flashlights, all fanning out through the tangled woods around Buffalo Creek. The muddy banks, so familiar to Clara and Jared as children, became a battleground between hope and growing dread. Volunteers combed through thickets and brush, calling Clara's name into the hush of trees, their voices swallowed by the dense spring foliage. The searchers stepped over mossy logs, waded through cold creek water, and swept their lights beneath tangled undergrowth. In the distance, a helicopter thudded overhead, blades beating a rhythm of urgency that made every heart pound a little faster. Forensics teams moved carefully around the garage, photographing and collecting what little evidence there was. On the ground, officers discovered Clara's cell phone, screen shattered, lying in a shallow ditch near the driveway. The device was damp from morning dew, but unmistakably hers, with a faded sticker of a white cat on the back. DNA specialists confirmed the blood droplets by the garage belonged to Clara, a fact that sent a new wave of panic through the searchers, who now whispered in nervous clusters, eyes darting between the trees and the road. By mid-afternoon, the town's ordinary routines had evaporated. Storefronts on Main Street hung hastily printed posters with Clara's photo, smiling, bright-eyed, wearing her favorite green sweater. Church doors, the grocery, the high school, all were plastered with pleas, "Bring Clara home." Social media buzzed with hashtags and frantic updates, but the reality on the ground was quieter, heavier, and filled with worry. That first night, the Whitmore house was a beacon of activity and heartbreak. The kitchen, usually warm with the smell of bread and laughter, filled instead with worried neighbors bearing casseroles and murmured prayers. Elaine set a plate for Clara at dinner as always, her movements automatic. She stared at the untouched food and tried to believe her daughter would walk through the door any second. Frank barely touched his own meal, staring instead at the flickering porch light, lost in memories of all the times he'd fixed Clara's bike or waited up for her to come home from choir practice. Jared refused to sleep. He sat on the back steps, clutching the silver heart necklace he'd found tangled in the grass, turning it over and over in his hand. Every few minutes, he replayed the morning in his mind, searching for something he'd missed. A detail, a clue, a moment when he could have stopped whatever had happened. But the past would not yield its secrets, and the night pressed down with the weight of unanswered questions. The search continued for days. Dogs sniffed through the woods, barking at old deer tracks and faint trails that led nowhere. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder, calling Clara's name into hollows and gullies, their hope slowly eroding with each fruitless hour. The sheriff set up a command post at the church fellowship hall, tracking every lead, no matter how faint. Tips came in by the dozen, each more desperate than the last. A suspicious truck, a stranger seen in town, a scream in the night that no one could quite remember clearly. The town, usually divided by the petty politics of small-town life, united around the Whitmores. Strangers brought coffee and blankets, pastors organized prayer circles, teachers collected funds for the family. The sense of community was real, but it could not fill the empty spaces left by Clara's absence. Children clung to their mothers' skirts. Windows glowed late into the night as people kept watch, unwilling to let darkness win. As days bled into weeks, hope became harder to sustain. The posters faded in the rain. The crowds thinned. But inside the Whitmore home, Elaine never stopped setting a plate for Clara, refusing to let go of the possibility that her daughter would return. Some wounds were too deep for words. The panic that had swept Linden left behind. A silence that felt even more suffocating. The search for Clara Whitmore was no longer just a rescue mission. It was a fight against the fear that anyone, anywhere, could vanish without a trace, and that sometimes even the fiercest love could not bring them home. As days became weeks, the hope that had first energized the search for Clara began to wane, replaced by a grinding determination to find answers, no matter how dark they might be. Linden's days became measured not by sunlight or rainfall, but by the quiet dread that hung in the air. A mother's exhausted sigh, a father's stubborn silence, a brother's eyes that never quite met anyone else's for long. The town itself seemed to shrink in on its secrets. Doors locked earlier, curtains drawn a little tighter, trust eroding like soil after a storm. Detectives from the state police took over the investigation, their cars a constant presence at the Whitmore house. They worked methodically, piecing together the last morning Clara was seen. Each detail, no matter how trivial, was dissected and filed away. Every minute of that Friday morning was charted and recharted on whiteboards in the sheriff's office, yet the timeline only revealed more uncertainty. The only hard clues, Clara's shattered phone, the blood by the garage, and the vanished signal, told just a fraction of the story. Forensic analysts combed through the phone's data. The device had pinged a cell tower northbound at 8:10 a.m., then again heading south before the signal disappeared completely at 8:35 near Old Pine Creek Road, a lonely stretch of asphalt bordered by shadowy woods. Investigators traced every route, questioning delivery drivers, farmers, and commuters. But no one remembered seeing Clara, or anyone who matched the description of the man in camouflage. As the investigation deepened, Rumors began to swirl through Linden. Names whispered over fences, in church pews, behind the closed doors of the corner store. 3 men quickly rose to the top of the suspect list, their pasts already marked by trouble and the kinds of stories people preferred not to tell. First was Zachary Hale, 28, a known drug offender who lived just 3 miles from the Whitmore house. Zachary was a man with a reputation for volatility, prone to violent outbursts and long disappearances. His weathered trailer sat at the end of a rutted road, windows papered over, a pit bull chained out front. Though Zachary claimed to know nothing about Clara or her family, he could offer no alibi for that morning. Investigators found a hunting jacket stained with old blood in his closet, but it was from a deer, not a person. No fingerprints, no DNA. Just stories, most of them ugly, all of them unprovable. Then there was Dylan Hale, Zachary's younger brother, whose life seemed permanently orbiting his siblings' chaos. Dylan was quieter, but rumors about him were worse. A few teenagers whispered that he'd once shown them a disturbing video, something cruel, something involving a girl, though no one could quite agree on the details. The investigators pressed him for the truth, but Dylan just stared at the floor, his answers slippery and incomplete. The third was Jason Otter, an acquaintance of both brothers and a hunting buddy with a reputation for helping clean up problems. Jason was often seen with Zachary, drinking at the river or working odd jobs around town. He had a history of minor offenses, trespassing, illegal trapping, a bar fight or two, but nothing that would make him stand out in a place where everyone bent the rules a little. Still, his name kept resurfacing in interviews. A neighbor claimed she'd seen Jason's truck near the Whitmore house that morning, though she couldn't say for certain. The memory faded, lost in the ordinary blur of rural life. Despite weeks of interviews and late-night strategy sessions, the investigation ground forward without real progress. Every lead unraveled into rumors and dead ends. The evidence, the blood, the cell phone, the trail into the woods, seemed to circle back on itself, never quite pointing to anyone. Desperation began to take hold. Each time the phone rang at the Whitmore house, hope flickered and then faded as another dead end was reported. The lack of answers gnawed at the town's nerves. Theories multiplied. Perhaps Clara had run away. Perhaps she'd been taken by someone passing through. Perhaps the truth was stranger still. But nothing fit. Clara's gentle nature, her deep ties to family and community, her ordinary plans for the day, none of it suggested she would ever leave by choice. Inside the Whitmore home, the family endured the endless churn of the investigation in different ways. Elaine drifted through her routines like a ghost, clutching Clara's necklace, refusing to let police box up her daughter's belongings. Frank spent long hours sitting on the porch, watching headlights come and go, never speaking of what he feared most. Jared haunted the edge of the woods, scouring the ground for any missed clue, guilt eating away at him for not doing more, for not seeing something that could have stopped it all. Outside, life struggled to return to normal. Church bells still rang, children played in yards, crops were planted and harvested, but an undercurrent of tension ran through everything. Posters of Clara's face, once bright with hope, began to curl at the edges, rain-soaked and faded. The case, with no new evidence and no arrests, slowly grew cold. Yet beneath that silence, the mystery festered, a constant ache for the Whitmore family, and a shadow over every ordinary moment in Linden. The truth, everyone felt, was still out there, waiting to be unearthed. And for those left behind, Waiting was the cruelest punishment of all. With every season that passed, the disappearance of Clara Whitmore faded from the daily conversations in Linden, but it never left the hearts of those who loved her. The case grew cold, like the heavy fog that sometimes rolled over Buffalo Creek and swallowed the Whitmore house, pressing against the windows in the early hours of morning. 3 years had slipped away since that terrible April day, but the sense of loss remained as sharp and bitter as ever. The search parties had dwindled, exhaustion and heartbreak finally winning out over hope. At first, dozens had come each weekend, braving the heat of summer or the chill of autumn, determined to find some trace of Clara. They trudged through the woods, kicked up leaves and peered into every abandoned barn, their voices hoarse from calling her name into silence. As time wore on, fewer showed up. Eventually, only Jared remained, wandering the muddy banks of the creek alone, haunted by what he had seen, or what he thought he'd seen, on that morning. Life in the Whitmore household became a quiet routine of longing and ritual. Elaine marked every birthday with candles on the kitchen table, the flames flickering and trembling, casting shadows across the family photos that lined the walls. Frank retreated even deeper into himself, his world shrinking to the borders of their property and the silence between meals. The town's support remained, but it grew quieter. A casserole left on the porch, a note in the mailbox, a prayer whispered in the church pew. Linden moved forward, as small towns do, but always with an emptiness that no one dared to name. In the years after Clara vanished, the investigation slowed to a crawl. Detectives rotated through the case files, the evidence boxes gathering dust in the sheriff's storeroom. Each time a new lead surfaced, a hiker found a scrap of cloth, a fisherman spotted something strange in the water. The hope that followed was always brief. Every clue dissolved into nothing, every theory dead-ended in uncertainty. The media attention faded too, replaced by other tragedies, other missing faces. Clara's photo hung in the post office longer than anywhere else, her smile now as much a part of Linden as the rusty old water tower, or the bend in the road where the wildflowers grew. And then, in the fall of 2015, everything changed. 3 men, ginseng hunters from a neighboring county, were walking deep in the Natchez Trace woods, their boots crunching through a carpet of fallen leaves. They had spent hours searching for the elusive route, eyes trained to the ground, minds focused on profit rather than the darkness of Linden's unsolved mystery. But as the sun began to sink behind the trees, one of them tripped on something half buried under a tangle of roots and branches. Curious, they brushed away the dirt and dead leaves, revealing the edge of a large, upside-down plastic container. It was out of place, too clean, too new for the woods. With growing unease, they flipped the container and pried off the lid. What they found inside brought their voices to a panicked, desperate pitch, echoing through the empty forest. Police were called, and the site was cordoned off with yellow tape as soon as the sun rose. Forensic teams arrived, carefully collecting every scrap of evidence, every bone, every thread. News of the discovery swept through Linden with the force of a tornado. For days, the town buzzed with anxiety as old fears rose again and old wounds reopened. The Whitmore family sat together in the living room, hands clasped, waiting for the knock that would end their years of not knowing. When the results came in, they left no room for hope. The remains inside the container were confirmed to be Clara Whitmore's. Forensic analysis told the story the town had dreaded: a single bullet wound to the back of her head. The same hands that had stolen her away had tried to erase her, but the truth had a way of returning, no matter how deep it was buried. The missing person case was now a murder investigation. Lyndon, stunned and grieving once more, fell silent. Old friends gathered at the Whitmore house, tears falling without words. Neighbors left flowers on the porch, lit candles, and drove slowly past, unwilling to break the quiet reverence that blanketed the street. The sheriff's office reopened the investigation, but time had washed away most of the evidence. Memories faded. Witnesses had moved on or passed away. The once crowded case files were thinner now, the list of suspects more uncertain. But one thing was clear. The crime that had haunted Lyndon was even darker, more brutal than anyone had dared to admit. For the first time, even hope itself seemed exhausted, lying down beside the sorrow that had settled in every corner of town. And so, in the aftermath of a grim discovery, Lyndon paused to mourn, unable to shake the shadow that Clara's loss had cast. The creek still flowed, the seasons still changed, but something essential was gone. Stolen not just from one family, but from everyone who had ever believed their town was safe. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the longing for answers that, for now, refused to come. For months after Clara's remains were found, Lyndon seemed to exist in a limbo of grief and unanswered questions. The discovery had brought a kind of closure, but it was a jagged, bitter thing, knowing what had become of Clara, but not why, or by whose hand. The murder investigation simmered quietly, detectives combing old case files, re-interviewing witnesses, hoping that time and circumstance had loosened tongues once kept silent by fear or loyalty. Then, in the winter of 2017, a rumor began to ripple through the local jail. Just a whisper at first, a careless boast overheard during a shuffling line for breakfast. A career petty criminal, desperate for a deal, told his cellmate that he knew who had killed the Whitmore girl. Soon, the rumor grew teeth. Zachary Hale, one of the town's original suspects, had supposedly bragged, "I took care of that girl from Lyndon." Word reached the sheriff's office. In the space of a week, the investigation that had felt frozen in time roared back to life, and detectives revisited the Hale brothers, digging deeper, questioning neighbors and old friends, chasing every piece of hearsay that might finally bring the truth to light. But it wasn't Zachary or Dylan who cracked. It was Jason Otter, the hunting buddy, with a reputation for doing the dirty work nobody else would. The story went that Jason, haggard and hollow-eyed after a stint in county jail, showed up one morning at the courthouse and demanded to speak to an investigator. His confession, when it came, was like poison slowly spreading through the veins of Lyndon. He described the morning of Clara's disappearance in chilling detail, how Zachary had lured her out, how things had spiraled in a way no one had meant, how Clara's pleas for mercy had gone unanswered. Jason claimed that after it was over, he'd helped carry Clara's body deep into the Natchez Trace woods, sealed her in the plastic container, and buried her beneath the leaves. His testimony painted a picture of violence, fear, and regret, naming Zachary Hale as the architect of the crime. The state seized on this confession. Prosecutors, eager to resolve a case that had haunted their offices for years, moved swiftly. Zachary Hale was arrested, his home searched, his phone records seized. In court, Jason took the stand, repeating the story with the kind of detail that made jurors avert their eyes. The trial lasted weeks, drawing crowds from across the county. For the Whitmores, it was agony to relive each moment, to hear the ways Clara's last hours had been twisted and magnified for the sake of justice. The evidence, still thin, was bolstered by Jason's testimony, which became the linchpin of the state's case. The jury took less than a day to return its verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder, with a sentence of life without parole, plus 50 years for kidnapping and assault. For the first time in years, the Whitmore family allowed themselves to cry with something close to relief. Elaine wept for her daughter. Frank gripped Jared's hand so tightly his knuckles turned white. Outside the courthouse, reporters spoke of closure, of justice served, of a wound finally beginning to heal. But the wound, it turned out, was far from closed. Years passed, the trial faded from headlines, and Linden tried to stitch itself back together. But the truth has a way of resisting burial. In a twist as cruel as any fate, Jason Alter, the key witness, recanted his entire confession. Sitting in a prison interview room, voice ragged and uncertain, Jason admitted that he'd made it all up, desperate to avoid the death penalty, desperate to make a deal. He claimed he'd been pressured, manipulated, coaxed into painting Zachary Hale as a killer. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, haunted by the knowledge that what he'd said had changed lives forever, perhaps stolen years from a man who might not be guilty at all. News of Jason's recantation shattered the fragile peace that had settled over Linden. The state's solved case was suddenly full of holes. Every certainty, every promise of justice had been poisoned by doubt. Prosecutors scrambled to defend their conviction, but whispers spread fast. Had they convicted the wrong man? Had the truth slipped away yet again, hidden beneath fear, pressure, and the desperate need for closure? For the Whitmore family, the pain of loss redoubled, this time mixed with a terrible uncertainty. Had Clara's killer really been brought to justice? Or was her story still unfinished, another secret festering in the dark? In the nights that followed, Elaine found herself sitting at Clara's empty desk, running her fingers over the battered textbooks, the necklace left behind, the dreams interrupted. The echoes of Jason's words lingered in every corner of the house, as if even the walls refused to accept that the nightmare was over. Linden grew quiet again, as small towns do when there are no answers. Some believed Jason's original confession. Others believed his recantation. The only thing they all shared was the uneasy knowledge that justice, in this world, is sometimes only an illusion. A fragile construction built on faith and the desperate hope that someday the truth will finally come home. By 2025, the shadow cast by Clara Whitmore's murder had stretched long across Linden. The quiet town had learned to live with heartbreak and uncertainty, but peace was always temporary, a thin veneer easily shattered by each new twist in the case. The recantation of Jason Otter's confession did not simply reopen old wounds. It ripped away the very foundation of what so many had chosen to believe. What remained was a landscape of suspicion, confusion, and grief, all tangled together like the roots along Buffalo Creek. The Tennessee courts took notice. With Jason's testimony officially withdrawn and rumors swirling of witness tampering and pressure, a post-conviction hearing was granted. For months, the legal teams pored over evidence, called in new forensic experts, and subpoenaed anyone who had touched the case in the past decade. News vans returned to Linden, their satellite dishes glittering in the sun, reporters eager to chase the ghost of a story that never seemed to rest. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was heavy with exhaustion and dread. Elaine and Frank Whitmore sat together in the front row, hands clasped so tightly their knuckles turned white. Jared stood behind them, his face harder now, jaw clenched against the tide of memories. They listened as lawyers spoke in dry, clinical tones about phone records, DNA tests, and the credibility of jailhouse informants. What mattered to them, the kindness of Clara's smile, the loss of her laughter, the life she should have lived, was lost in the legalese and cross-examinations. As the hearing stretched on, another witness stepped forward, one whose testimony had been central to the original conviction. With a trembling voice, this witness admitted to fabricating parts of their story, pressured perhaps by investigators eager for a resolution, or simply swept up in the drama of a case that had already become legendary in rural Tennessee. The revelation sent a fresh wave of shock through the court. Journalists scribbled furiously. Prosecutors' faces grew taut. Defense attorneys pressed for a retrial. The Whitmore family was pulled in every direction, hearts divided by grief and doubt. Elaine clung to the hope that justice had been served, unwilling to face the possibility that her daughter's killer still walked free. Frank grew silent, his trust in institutions shaken, his nights spent staring out the window into the darkness that seemed to press in on all sides. Jared felt himself split in two, one half still certain of Zachary Hale's guilt, the other tormented by the fear that the real story had never truly come to light. The community, too, was fractured. Some neighbors believed that the system had done its job and that reopening the case was a cruel insult to Clara's memory. Others whispered that mistakes had been made, that someone else was responsible, that maybe, just maybe, the truth had always been more complicated than anyone wanted to admit. Tension simmered beneath every polite exchange at the grocery store, every handshake at Sunday church. Where once there had been unity, now there was a gulf, one marked by suspicion, by the ache of unresolved pain. Standing outside the courthouse one spring morning, Jared looked at the crowd gathered on the steps, journalists with cameras, neighbors holding faded "Justice for Clara" signs, strangers drawn by the spectacle of tragedy, and felt hollowed out by the weight of not knowing. He found himself thinking of the little moments he'd shared with his sister, skipping rocks on the creek, bickering over chores, promising to watch out for each other in a world that sometimes felt too big. He wondered if he'd ever be able to keep that promise, or if the answers would remain forever just out of reach. "If he didn't do it," Jared whispered, voice lost in the buzz of reporters and lawyers, "then who killed my sister?" This question now lingered over everything, a question that refused to die, no matter how many court dates or headlines it spawned. The case of Clara Whitmore had transformed into something larger than one family's pain. It had become a symbol of doubt, of the ways in which justice could be bent or broken by human frailty, by desperation, by the need for closure at any cost. Clara's story was recounted on true crime podcasts and local radio stations, discussed in classrooms and coffee shops, studied by law students and armchair detectives alike. Her name, once spoken only in love or longing, became shorthand for a tragedy that asked more questions than it ever answered. In Linden and across Tennessee, people wondered if justice would ever truly be served, or if some wounds, like those left by Clara's absence, could never fully heal. Yet even as hope flickered and faded, the search for truth continued. Somewhere, perhaps, the answer waited in a forgotten file, in a memory long suppressed, in the heart of someone who had remained silent for too long. For the Whitmore family, there was nothing to do but endure, holding fast to the memory of the girl they had lost and the slim, stubborn belief that someday the truth would come home. In the end, Clara Whitmore's story was more than a murder mystery. It was a testament to the power of love, the persistence of doubt, and the endless, aching search for justice in a world where it is too often denied. The story of Clara Whitmore was never just a headline or a segment on the evening news. It was a living presence in Linden, a shadow at every gathering, an ache in the air on cold April mornings. As the years passed and the legal wrangling continued, the pain of not knowing transformed Clara's case into a parable, not only for her family, but for all of Tennessee. People would lower their voices when discussing the details, caught between the urge to move on and the duty to remember. This story was not born from pure imagination. Beneath every chilling detail and every unanswered question lay the ghost of something real, the true-life tragedy of Holly Lynn Bobo, a young nursing student whose fate had shocked and saddened the state just a year before Clara's fictional disappearance. Like Clara, Holly was 20 years old, loved fiercely by her family, and determined to help others through a career in medicine. She too had vanished from her home in a small Tennessee town, and the frantic search, the community heartbreak, the endless speculation had all played out in devastating reality. In Holly's case, the facts were as haunting as any nightmare a storyteller could conjure. On a bright spring morning, she was seen for the last time outside her family's house. Within minutes, she was gone, leaving behind a trail of confusion, a lunchbox in the yard, a bloodstain on the grass, a family shattered by fear. The search that followed was exhaustive, drawing hundreds from across the region. Volunteers waded through woods and creeks, helicopters buzzed overhead, prayer circles formed on church lawns, and every road became a potential clue or escape route. It took years before Holly's remains were discovered, deep in the thick Tennessee woods. The mystery of what had happened, of why and by whom, was slow to reveal itself. There were arrests, confessions, and public outrage. The trials were long, emotionally wrenching, and filled with contradictions. Witnesses changed their stories. Rumors swirled about evidence lost, mistakes made, and the terrible pressures of closing a case that had become a symbol for so many. Even after convictions were secured, the sense of closure was incomplete. Years later, a key witness would step forward and recant, claiming coercion, confusion, or fear. The certainty that justice had been done was replaced by the torment of new questions. Had the right people been held accountable? Had the courts delivered truth? Or just an answer that was convenient, politically expedient, or emotionally necessary for a grieving public? The doubts were as relentless as grief itself. In telling Clara's story, every page echoed with the unresolved pain of Holly Bobo's real-life family. The longing for answers, the weight of rumor and suspicion, the nights spent replaying every possible scenario. These were not just elements of fiction, but reflections of lived experience. Friends who had known Holly could see her face in every missing person poster, every plea for information. Families across Tennessee recognized the warning signs and locked their doors a little tighter. Clara's case, like Holly's, became a cautionary tale. Parents reminded their daughters to stay alert, to trust their instincts, to never walk alone at dawn. Towns formed neighborhood watches, installed security cameras, and held candlelight vigils that blurred the line between remembrance and fear. The loss of one life changed the texture of daily existence, reminding everyone how quickly the ordinary can turn into the unthinkable. And yet, Beneath the shock and the sorrow, something else endured, a stubborn, quiet hope. Search parties may have faded, news coverage may have moved on, but the longing for truth did not die. In Linden, the Whitmore family still set a place for Clara at the table on her birthday. Elaine tended her daughter's favorite flowers in the garden, watering them every morning, whispering memories into the soft Tennessee air. Frank oiled the old pickup truck, sometimes staring at the garage for hours, wondering if there was still something he had missed. Jared kept a stack of his sister's notebooks on his desk, opening them on restless nights, reading her words for comfort. True crime podcasts and documentaries picked up the story, weaving together interviews, theories, and archival audio. College students in Nashville debated the meaning of justice in modern America, citing Clara and Holly as examples of why the system must always be questioned. Journalists revisited Linden every April, interviewing the townspeople, trying to find new angles on a tragedy that refused to fade. But for those at the center, every retelling was a reminder of the life that had been stolen, the dreams interrupted, and the fragile line between fact and fiction. This story, narrators would say, is based on a true case. It is a work of imagination, yes, but it springs from the same heartbreak that still haunts the Tennessee hills. The disclaimer was always there, a pause for breath between sorrow and suspense. But no disclaimer could soften the impact. Clara Whitmore's name joined a long, sad roll call, names whispered in small towns and big cities alike, each one a reminder that no community is immune to darkness, and that justice is never as simple or as sure as it seems. And so Linden's story became a kind of prayer, a plea for answers, for change, for a world where no family must endure the agony of not knowing. The lessons lingered, as persistent and bittersweet as memory. Lock your doors, trust your instincts, never let violence go unchallenged. But most of all, remember, because forgetting is the only true defeat, and some stories must be told again and again until justice is finally done. Clara Whitmore only wanted to save lives. She dreamed of white hospital corridors, of helping strangers in their darkest hour, of bringing hope into the world's ordinary pain. Her life, though brief, had been a testament to quiet kindness, 1,000 small acts that left deep marks in the hearts of those who knew her. Her absence would never be measured only in sorrow, but in the space she left behind. The silent dinner table, the empty seat in the church pew, the echo of laughter that never quite returned to the Whitmore house. As the years passed, Linden slowly settled into a new rhythm, one marked by remembrance. Every spring, wildflowers bloomed along Buffalo Creek, and neighbors left bouquets beneath the old oak tree by the Whitmore's porch. At the annual town fair, Clara's photo, smiling, alive, forever young, was displayed among the homemade pies and quilts, a gentle nudge to never let her story fade. Her mother Elaine kept her daughter's favorite mug on the kitchen shelf, refusing to let it gather dust. Frank, worn by grief but anchored by love, fixed up the old pickup truck, teaching local kids how to check the oil and change a tire, always ending his lessons with a story about Clara's determination and stubborn hope. In the quiet moments, memories of Clara returned with bittersweet clarity. Jared would sometimes find himself retracing the paths they used to walk together, down to the creek, past the overgrown willows, or through the rusted gate behind the house. He'd remember the times she patched up his scraped knees, listened patiently to his fears, or stood up for him when no one else would. In the dark, sleepless hours, He found comfort in her old notebooks, in the scribbled dreams she'd left behind. Lists of places to see, names of hospitals she hoped to work for, promises to herself to always be brave, even when it's hard. But grief, as the people of Linden came to know, is both a wound and a bond. The Whitmore family's pain became a kind of touchstone for the town. It reminded everyone how fragile life was, how quickly the world could shift from safe and predictable to terrifyingly uncertain. In their loss, others found a reason to hold their loved ones closer, to say "I love you" more often, to notice the quiet signs of someone in need. Clara's absence was a scar that ran through every life she'd touched, and for many, it was also a lesson. Outsiders came and went. Journalists, lawyers, activists, even true crime fans drawn by the case's notoriety. Some came for justice, others for answers. A few only for the thrill of a story that refused to die. But Linden protected its own. For the Whitmores, for those who remembered Holly Lynn Bobo, and all the others like her, the meaning of Clara's story was never about headlines or podcasts. It was about the promise that the truth, however long denied, would one day be revealed, and that the memory of those lost would not be erased by the passing of time. Each year, on the anniversary of Clara's disappearance, townspeople gathered at the community center. They lit candles, shared stories, sang old hymns, and recited the pledge that had become their rallying cry. We will not forget. We will not be silent. We will keep searching until the last light fades. The ceremony was simple, but it resonated, weaving hope and determination into every whispered prayer. And in every gathering, there was always a call to action. The pastor would step forward, voice steady, urging everyone to be vigilant, to look out for their neighbors, to trust their instincts, to report anything suspicious without hesitation. Parents reminded their children to walk in groups, to stay alert, to never let their guard down. The sheriff, grayer now, spoke of the importance of never letting fear turn to apathy. Justice, he'd remind them, is not just for the courtroom. It's something we build together, every day, in how we care for one another. Across Tennessee, the story of Clara Whitmore and Holly Lynn Bobo became more than a cautionary tale. It became a movement, an insistence that violence must never be ignored, that every missing person deserves to be found, that every community can do better. Nonprofits sprang up. Hotlines were posted in schools. Volunteers went door to door distributing flyers and teaching self-defense. Candlelit vigils were held for other missing sons and daughters, each flame a testament to the lives cut short and the hope that justice would still be done. As the story of Clara spread, people learned to recognize the signs of danger, to intervene, to refuse the easy comfort of saying, "It can't happen here." And in this way, her legacy grew. She became a symbol not just of tragedy, but of resilience and action, the spark that inspired people to speak out, to listen more closely, to be brave enough to face the darkest corners of their world. In the end, Clara's story is a call. It asks every listener, every parent, every friend and stranger, be cautious when you walk alone. Trust your instincts and trust each other. Report what you see, even if it feels small. Say no to violence in all its forms, and never believe that silence or forgetting will heal what only the truth can mend. Because some wounds, like the one left in the Whitmore family and in Linden itself, can only be healed by truth. Some stories must be told again and again, not for the sake of fear, but for the hope that one day no one else will have to light a candle for someone who never made it home. Subscribe, turn on the bell, and help us keep their stories alive. For Clara, for Holly, and for everyone still waiting for answers.